You lead teams globally. What is most important to you when you're looking to acquire new talent or to upskill your current teams?
Well, you have to rethink how you're hiring. Talking with a colleague of mine, and they're like, where should we start recruiting people going forward? I'm like, let's go after the debate team.
When I talk to clients, a lot of the questions we get is how do we drive efficiencies? How do we drive productivity? But I feel like that's just the low-hanging fruit.
How do I make things that my clients want even more of? How do I make what I have even stickier for my clients? To get to 100 million users, it took mobile 16 years. It took the internet 8 years. It took Google search 6 years and ChatGPT 2 months. When you look at the major inflection points in history, the consistent thing out of all of them is you got through it and there were more jobs. They were different, but there were more jobs every time.
Jill Jensen, welcome to our Mass Impact podcast. Really appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing your wisdom and advice and insights. 40 years. That's how long today's guest has been inside JP Chase, watching payments evolve from manual to digital to real time and now into AI. Most people will call that a career. Jill's probably thinking, we're getting started.
That's right.
So Jill is a managing director leading payments technology. JP is a firm that we have the privilege of partnering with directly at Mass. And so we've seen firsthand the caliber of thinking that happens at your level. In payments tech, leads the public sector, receivables, investigations, trade, and working capital and regional teams. She is also the senior sponsor of recruiting and mobility for Tampa, where we are today. Yep. Beautiful view with the water in front of us, with the Good Works program. Again, she's worked almost 40 years at JP Chase, and currently a member of the CIB LGBTQ plus Executive Forum. So let's start with your story. It's so fascinating to see how you built a career across decades, and you've seen the evolution of payments and society. And so what moments really shaped your path?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. Every time I hear that 40 number, it's like you wake up and you go, how did that happen? How did you hit 40 years at a firm? But it's really been quite the journey. I started out as a bank teller in college. And then when I graduated from college, I went into operations. So started my career on the operations side, in payments, but on the operations side, and then spent 18 years in operations before being asked to come over to technology and really asking the person, are you sure you want me to come to technology? You know, I don't have a tech background. And he was like, nope, I think you could do good over here. And so took the leap of faith and moved over to tech. And the last 22 years have flown by. There's been so much innovation, so much change in tech and what we do. And, the responsibilities have kept expanding. I think about the list you rattled off there of the different products that my teams serve up the technology for, and then the ability to see my global team continue to grow. It's been a lot of fun.
Because I think that's fascinating, moving from operations to tech. In today's world, I think the lines between business and technology are fading, but some people are afraid to sort of move to the other side, whatever they think is the dark side. So what do you think was happening in your mind at that moment?
Yeah, like you're right. The lines are going to be blurring. They've blurred now. They're going to continue to blur even more, and I think we'll get probably into that a little bit later. But back then, there wasn't too many people who had left operations and gone into to tech, and it was really the person who came and asked me. It was a mentor of mine, somebody I really looked up to, and just convinced me that the skills were transferable, even if you didn't have the technical expertise or the traditional training of a technologist. That you got to think about yourself from the skills you bring to the table, not the bits and pieces you may not have.
Absolutely, and that's so relevant in today's world when we're entering into new territories. And so what are those skills that are transferable so we can be part of this new, brave new world? So let's get into payments, because that's exciting today. I don't know if back then you thought payments was going to be there will be so much innovation. But how is AI reshaping global transactions? And before you answer that, I just want to put this in context for our listeners. I went to the website to get some official data. as of 2023, 9.8 trillion in daily payments processed, 160 plus countries and 120 plus currencies. It's just massive, right? At massive scale, massive volume of data. And so how do you see AI reshaping that?
Yeah, and like you go back and you say that was 2023, you go back to like probably 2018, our peak days were like 6 trillion. We were doing like, on average 4. And last year, our peak days we topped over 16 trillion, with our average days being in the 12 to 13 range. Wow. So you just think about that growth in under 10 years is just amazing. And it's really come on, the back of a lot of things that have, exploded. You have a lot more consumers using, consumer to consumer, business to consumer payments. The gig economy has changed the way people think about their paydays. It's not I get my choice of once a month or twice a month. Like a lot of companies in the gig world get paid when they want to. So there's a lot going on in the payment space. Obviously, we've gone to a concept of a business day to really 24/7 real-time payments, which again a decade ago never even existed. So you think about all of that change coming in a very compact time, and then the concept of I don't even need to use a card anymore. I get out of the Uber and the payment happens. Yep. I walk through an Amazon store, and when I leave the store, the payment happens. I don't have to take anything out of my pocket. My phone's my card now. And so that's the type of innovation that's happening, where you want people to be able to make the payment when they want it, how they want it, but you don't want to make it complicated for them. And that started in the consumer business, but now it's bleeding over into the B2B or the business to business world as well.
Interesting. Well, I feel that there's even been so much change since I came to the US 25 years ago on how you do business with banks, and how it's just so seamless and convenient, even across countries. What do you see as most transformative going forward, right? Especially with AI, probably quantum coming, or what do you think soon will become the most transformative thing in the payments space?
The AI models have really changed, and at the speed at which they've changed has been incredible to watch. Even 8-10 months ago, I would say they were more in the realm of autocomplete, where yes, they could assist in doing things and assist in doing tasks, but the models today can write entire systems by themselves, unattended, and that transformation in 8 months is incredible. Now that comes with some cyber and security and concerns as well, but the thing that we thought was a tech tool is becoming a transformative tool for the way we're going to do business. And these agents don't have to just be in the hands of tech anymore. You can talk to them in plain English, and they can transform that into code, into systems. And so it's going to level the playing field somewhat on the ability to truly scale up. It's going to make smaller teams be as efficient as some bigger teams if they can use the tooling appropriately. But it's definitely going to change the way that we work, and we have to figure this out. There's no playbook on how to do this new workflow. We are learning as we're going, and that's what's absolutely exciting to me.
It's very exciting, and you mentioned it's transforming how we do business, and I think that's critical. When I talk to clients, a lot of the questions we get is, how do we drive efficiencies? How do we drive productivity? And absolutely can do that. But I feel like that's just the low-hanging fruit. Yeah. Is how do you rethink what is now possible with the technology that we have today that was not possible 3, 4, 5 years, or even 6 months ago? Yeah. Because it's going so fast.
You're right. I mean, we've had AI, machine learning tools for decades, right? Yep. It's been out there for decades, but we've used them as efficiency drivers. Right. Like how do we take toil out? How do we reduce, non-value add services? How do we allow the volume growth that we talked about for us without having to add an army of people to support that volume? Right. So those have all been great things. But now with the transformative nature of the things we're seeing, it needs to pivot to not how do I use it as efficiency play, but how do I use it as growth play? Like, right. How do I make things that my clients want even more of? How do I make what I have even stickier for my clients? How do I make it easy for them to come to my products and leave where they're at today? Those are the things that we have to think about and drive, because you can take so much out, but when you also have to then start thinking about how do I grow the top line as well, yeah. Right?
Of course, it's not AI transformation, digital transformation. It's a true business transformation led by the technology available and what the business goals are. You mentioned briefly is changing how we work. So we're building faster. Yep. Everyone has agentic tools available. We're having to learn really fast, learn how to learn. How is that truly changing how you're working as a team and how you're building your teams?
It's going to put a big emphasis on communication and communicating a lot more frequently, a lot faster. We're going to have to iterate faster, fail faster, change directions faster. It's really having, we've talked about co-location and all that stuff, but really co-located teams all working together, and that not just being the tech side, but having the product there and some of our ops there, and being able to really spin up a POC really quick and then say, oh no, this isn't what we want. Let's change directions. Yeah. But the communication is going to be key. We don't have the luxury of taking time to go out and learn. And I went to a coworker and said, you were talking about what you're doing with the latest AI agent. Show me, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be humble enough to say, show me what you're doing, and then learning from others, because it's changing so fast. We are trying to get our folks communicating more and sharing more, so that people can learn at the right pace, because. We're all out there, we're all getting these tools, we're all playing with them, and we're discovering things, and then it's how do you take those discoveries and then get it to the masses in a company like the size of ours.
Right, yeah, and it takes leaders, like you said, actually playing with it, at least enough to understand what is possible and to make sure what kind of expectations you can have from your teams, right?
Yeah, we went through my history. I'm not a technical person by trade. I wasn't trained in college on it. I've learned a lot in the 22 years I've been there. A couple months ago, I downloaded Claude on my home PC, and I built my first application. Nice. And I don't know how to code, and so that's the things you have to do. And then then I came back in and I shared it with my teams, because it's like you have to let people know I'm out there trying to learn this stuff. You guys got to get involved too.
Absolutely, leading by example. Yes, love it. So speaking of leading, how do we lead with purpose, right? Driving innovation through inclusion. How do we make sure that everyone has access to these incredible opportunities? And also there are challenges, right? If people don't adapt fast enough and they don't show that they're really leaning into this, being curious, they might be at risk, right? So at Mass, we're 100% women-owned company. We have a mission to impact 1 million women and Latinos through tech. It's personal for me. A scholarship changed my life. That's how I became a software engineer, now an entrepreneur. And I promised myself I'm going to pay it forward, right? And I think this is such a great opportunity to build those skills for everyone, right? Not just the ones that typically have access to this. So you've lived a version of this inside JP Morgan. And I've seen you very active in our Tampa community and having awards for your work. Why is this work meaningful to you? Why does this matter? And how does leading with purpose actually drive innovation?
So when I think about the work that we need to do and the word inclusion, and you look at it and you say what you need around the table is people who represent the clients and the customers that you're trying to attract. Yeah. So when you think about that, we're going out into a global economy and selling our products. And by definition, that economy is diverse. Our clients are diverse, so we want people putting our products together that represent the communities that we serve, the countries that we operate in. And so you need to be able to be open enough to look around the table and say, what voices aren't here? And actively seeking out to make sure you have those voices. I'm very passionate about women in technology, very passionate about the LGBTQ plus community. And, I need to understand that those are two of my identities I have to bring, as well as the identity of being a technologist. Mm-hmm. You have to wear all of those identities kind of equally and make sure that you're thinking through the purpose of what you're trying to do as an organization. We think about inclusion, and I often say, if you went out and asked somebody, are you inclusive? They're going to say yes. Very rarely are you ever going to get somebody to say no. But then I always followed up with, what are the two things you've done in the last couple of weeks that demonstrate inclusion? Mm. And people are like, whoa. Mm. Because it's not a theory. It's not a thought in my mind. It's really an action. Yeah. And that means that you bring the earliest entry software engineer to the table and let them have a voice, because they're going to look at things differently than the person that's been there 40 years like me, and it has this process ingrained in their head. And all of that has to be the way that we build software anymore.
I can relate to that so much, right? As a Latina, as an immigrant, I want Latinas and immigrants and women to succeed and to have a path in tech and to benefit from it. And yesterday I was just speaking at an event. There's a Tampa Tech Week going on, and it was in collaboration with Latinas in Tech. And I was just saying, we all need to be part of this, right? Yep. We all need to be protagonists, and we need to be builders, not just consumers. But to be builders, we need to acquire the skills, and that's part of what our work is with the foundation. How do we give everyone access to those skills? We created this scholarship, the Más Globally Afí Scholarship, and the very first recipient of that scholarship in Medellin, Colombia, she is now an AI engineer for one of the largest fintech firms in the U.S., one of our clients.
Nice.
And so that's action, right? Yep. And I'm not saying that to brag, but to hopefully inspire people. Everyone is in a position to help somebody at whatever means and scale that they can. So that's a great way to describe what true inclusion is.
Yeah, I see people, and one of the biggest lessons I learned in moving from operations into tech is in operations 20 years ago, there were a lot of women in leadership roles. Mm-hmm. And when I moved over to tech, I was the only woman in the room most of the time. Yep. And so completely different. And we still are struggling to get the representation across women in technology like we'd like to see. But we also need to make sure, as women in technology, we're helping each other out. We're pulling each other up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the global pulse, right? The power of tech hubs from Tampa to LATAM. We were just talking about how much you travel across Latin America and the world. At Mass, we have international teams. Of course, we're based in Tampa. Our clients are in the U.S. I'm from Colombia, and I may be biased, but the engineering talent coming out of LATAM is just extraordinary. Not just the skills, the creativity, the resourcefulness, like the hungriness to make this happening, which I think is what we're going to need a lot of. But AI, I think, is shifting the thought about locations versus where can we find talent that can adapt fast and that can truly connect tech to the business value, right? And so that is definitely changing the landscape. You lead teams globally. What have you learned? And as a regional head, what is most important to you when you're looking to acquire new talent or to upskill your current teams?
So we do. We have tech centers around the globe, and I have teams in all of the regions. And it's really important that we understand where the talent is and where the talent wants to be. And some of that has shifted over time. But we also need to understand the power of co-location and the ability of sharing ideas. And so our concept is, we build teams in our major tech centers, and we then encourage them to work with the teams across the different lines of business within JP Morgan. Sometimes you come in and you get so bogged down in your day to day that you may be working at a tech center with 2,000 people, but you see 8. Right.
Yes.
So we openly encourage and have communities of practice within the tech centers to encourage that. With taking the more global role for the regions and payments over the last year, there's a balance. You have the local nuances that you have to respect and cater to, but then everything's becoming so global. So you want to run on your global instances, you want to run on your global systems,
right.
And with 24/7. To give people work-life balance, then you need to rely on global support because it's not just 9 to 5 in your local time zone anymore that we're doing business. So
especially in payments.
Yeah, especially in payments. And so it's really a balancing act to think about how you're setting up your organizational model to handle the type of business you're doing and balance what do we need locally versus what can we rely on globally.
Yeah. Do you find your teams putting less emphasis on tech skills and more on soft skills, which I call the hard skills, like emotional intelligence? You mentioned communication, critical judgment. Because if you have an engineer that's now orchestrating agents, maybe they're not doing the coding, but they still need to understand if this will really work at scale. Is this secure? Will this perform? Does it really meet the requirements? How are you changing that into the hiring process?
Well, you have to rethink how you're hiring. Definitely, this is going to adjust that, and it's like we have to think about these skills differently. Traditionally, the stereotypical tech person is more of an introvert and would prefer to crank out code at their desk than talk with a product or an ops person. But that's changing, and we've slowly seen part of that change through just the adoption of some of the more iterative practices that have come through the technology world. They're going to need to be able to master the way of the English language. I was talking with a colleague of mine, and they're like, where should we start recruiting people going forward? I'm like, let's go after the debate team.
Yes.
Because they understand the language and they know how to use it for a purpose.
And they can challenge.
Yes. So, but it's gonna require differences. I mean, we were talking. We bring in young talent right out of college into our program within JP Morgan, and we've trained them for years and years and years how to be really great software engineers by giving them coding tasks. So how do you take a newly minted college graduate and teach them how to be a seasoned software engineer, and they're not going to code anymore?
Right.
So you're going to have to think about these things in a different way, and nobody's figured it out. Nobody has the playbook, but we're talking about it a lot, and we're thinking about it, and we're trying to get out there. The other thing that you kind of alluded to was, there's some anxiety in the workforce. There's an anxiety in the tech industry. There's people out there saying, or they're going to, half the coders are going to be eliminated. Right. Like every one of those, I kind of laugh at because we don't know what the end game here is going to be. I do think this is one of those inflection points in the industry, and we need to work through it. My take is a decade from now, we're going to look back and say, remember when that happened?
Yeah.
And I think it is going to make the workforce and the way we work look a lot different. But I also think when you look at the major inflection points in history, the consistent thing out of all of them is you got through it and there were more jobs. They were different, but there were more jobs every time. Like you talk about agriculture, or industrial, or the internet boom. There were always more jobs coming out of it. But you're going to have to morph your skill set. So,
yeah, and morph is probably the key word, right? The traditional sense software engineer that I trained for when I went to college, 5.5 years, that's probably not going to be the software engineer of the future, right? Whatever we call that profession. But I see my clients need a lot of help. It's one thing to have tools building amazing applications faster, absolutely, but integrating them into the infrastructure, the ecosystem, the APIs, the security, that still takes a lot of guidance and a lot of work, and that's where companies can continue to evolve.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, we've been saying speed, like everything's faster. We have more tech, we can build faster. How do you balance that speed of innovation with reliability, especially when a mistake can be very impactful when we talk about that scale of payments?
Yeah, speed is the speed of change, and the speed of innovation is just at a pace that none of us have ever seen before in this industry. I heard a stat a couple weeks ago, and it said, to get to 100 million users, it took mobile 16 years. It took the internet 8 years. It took Google search 6 years, and ChatGPT 2 months. So you think about that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all happened in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And now you're looking back and you're saying, ChatGPT, that's so yesterday, right? You're like, I want Claude, or I want Copilot, or I want these different things. And ChatGPT was just a few, not that long ago.
Yeah.
So the speed is changing, I think we have to acknowledge that, but we can't be victims to it either. We have to figure out how to deal with it. We have teams around us that we have to rely on and utilize. But for us at JP Morgan, like, trust is our business. Like, it's the foundation of what we do. We offer a lot of projects and services, but the thing we are best at is trust. Yeah. And that's what our clients rely on us for. That's what our clients come to us for. So we need to be able to make sure we can keep up with the pace of innovation, utilize the best of these tools, but we have to do it from a place of, we're never going to try to endanger any of our clients' data or privacy. And that's a constant, ongoing battle as well, because not only are you excited because you have these tools, you're a little terrified because the bad guys have these tools too. Yeah. And so we have to think about it from, what can we do with them, to how do we protect ourselves from them as well.
That's all with the tension, especially with recent announcements and models becoming more and more powerful. You made me think of something I heard at Harvard earlier this year. Someone said there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen.
Yeah. No, that's what my weeks feel like that.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yes. Great. Well, we're getting towards the end. 4 decades of work for this amazing career journey and such an exciting space in payments tech. What advice do you have for other tech leaders that are navigating exactly this level of tension, especially at large, complex organizations like yours?
Number one, you have to be curious. You have to lean in. You have to experiment, and you have to be realistic. Like, we're not going to have all the answers, and you have to let people know, I'm not holding all the answers either, and so it's okay that you have some questions and concerns. And I think you have to, this is a time where I feel that our leaders are going to need to lead from the front, because it's such a pace of change, and it's so disruptive that the anxiety in the workforce is real. And I can feel it when I visit the sites. I can feel it by the types of questions I get from our teams. And I think they need to see more of us, and they need to see more of us talking about these things openly. So my advice is, you need to be doing your homework and learning as much as possible, and you need to be out of your office and on the floor and more visible to your people more often.
Yeah, it's not the time to hide or to not be visible, for sure. So to close, let's talk about the skills of the future. Of course, there's a lot that we don't know, but we do know that the same skills that served us 5 years ago are not the same that will serve us in the next 5 years. And this Mass Impact podcast is all about, how do we make sure that everyone benefits from what's coming, right? Not only the people who traditionally have access to the right type of skills, AI, quantum, whatever is next in our horizon. And so I feel like as leaders, this moment matters. What we do to bring others along in the journey matters. And so in that context, what do you think, what those skills, we talked a little bit about some of them, but what do you think will be important for people to access those skills, for everyone in our communities to access those skills of the future?
Yeah, I think curiosity and a desire to continue to learn are going to be key because you're right. What got us here is not going to take us very far going forward. There was a lot of space kind of put between the people who were trained in technology and the people that were not, and that space has kind of been closed by these tools, because if somebody can master the human language, they can now get tools to do the coding for them. Not to say that that means that they understand performance and how to put it all together and all the things that come with that. But you're going to have to morph into being a really excellent technician and software engineer, software designer, architect, those sorts of things. Yes. Not just doing task-related items. And again, you need to be on top of what's happening in the industry and talking to a lot of people. So communication, curiosity, wanting to learn is going to be key going forward.
Yeah, and learning how to learn.
Yeah,
because it's going to be an ongoing thing.
It's a different process. Yeah.
Yes, awesome. But this is exactly the kind of conversation that Mass Impact was built for. Really appreciate your perspective. You have an incredible career that started at a teller window, and now you're shaping global payments. Really, congratulations with your increasing level of responsibility. And through it all, you've shown a commitment to bring other people along with you. And that is through inclusive leadership that shows action, not just words and policies. So thank you for your time, for your honesty, for being here in our Mass Global office, in our podcast, for all the work that you do with JP Morgan, with the communities. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.